Chapter 1. The Illusion of Control. There is a quiet belief most people carry without ever questioning it. A belief that sounds logical, responsible, even intelligent. It goes like this. If I think about this long enough, if I analyze every angle, if I prepare perfectly, then I will be safe. This belief feels comforting. It feels mature. It feels like control. But this belief is the beginning of the overthinking trap, because thinking more does not always bring clarity. Very often, it brings paralysis. Overthinking rarely feels like a problem at first. It feels like strength. You are not rushing. You are not careless. You are being smart. You are considering all options. You are making sure you don't make a mistake. On the surface, this looks like responsibility. It looks like maturity. It looks like self-control. But slowly, something shifts. You start thinking instead of acting. You start planning instead of moving. You start analyzing instead of living. Without noticing, your life pauses while your mind keeps running. This is how the illusion of control is born. Your brain is designed to protect you, not to make you successful or fulfilled, but to keep you safe. When you face something uncertain, a decision, a change, a step forward, your brain looks for ways to reduce risk. One of the easiest ways to feel safe is to stay in your head. Thinking creates distance, and distance feels like protection. As long as you are thinking, you are not exposed, not vulnerable, not risking failure or regret. So the brain whispers, "Not yet. Let's think a bit more. We're not ready. One more analysis." You listen, because it sounds reasonable. At the core of overthinking is a deep discomfort with uncertainty. Uncertainty means you might choose wrong, fail, disappoint someone, regret it later, or lose control. The mind hates not knowing, so it tries to predict, calculate, and simulate every possible outcome. It runs scenarios. It replays conversations. It imagines future mistakes and tries to prevent them in advance. But life does not work that way. No amount of thinking can remove uncertainty from the future. Still, overthinking keeps promising that just a little more thought will make you feel ready. That readiness never comes. There is a subtle moment when thinking stops being useful. At first, thinking helps you understand. Then it helps you prepare. But after a certain point, thinking only repeats itself. You revisit the same scenarios, the same doubts, the same questions. You don't gain new insight, only mental noise. This is the moment when thinking becomes avoidance. Not conscious avoidance and not laziness, but protective avoidance. Your mind stays busy, so it feels productive, while your life stays the same. Overthinking often hides behind noble intentions. You don't want to rush. You don't want to hurt anyone. You don't want to fail or regret your choice. You want to do the right thing. You want to be responsible. But while you try to avoid mistakes, you begin avoiding movement itself. There is a cost to that. Opportunities fade, energy drains, confidence erodes. The longer you stay stuck in thought, the harder action feels, not because action is dangerous, but because you have trained your brain to associate movement with threat. Here is a truth most people never hear. Control is not safety. Control is an illusion of safety. Real safety does not come from predicting everything. It comes from trusting your ability to respond. When you overthink, you are trying to control outcomes. When you act, you are building resilience. One creates stagnation. The other creates growth. But the brain prefers control because it feels familiar, even when it slowly limits your life. Overthinking is especially common among intelligent, thoughtful people. Thinking has worked for you before. It helped you solve problems, succeed academically, and understand complex situations. So when life demands action instead of analysis, you apply the same tool. This time, it backfires, because not everything can be solved in the mind. Some clarity appears only after movement. Some confidence appears only after action. Some answers arrive only once you're already on the path. Another hidden layer of the illusion of control is the belief that clarity must come before action. Many people tell themselves, once I feel clear, I will move. Once I feel confident, I will start. Once I am sure, I will decide. But clarity is not a prerequisite for action. Clarity is often the result of action. Waiting for certainty keeps you trapped in your head, endlessly preparing for a moment that never arrives. The overthinking trap is dangerous because it does not feel like a trap. It feels like responsibility, caution, even wisdom. It feels like you are being careful with your life. But slowly, it disconnects you from your instincts, your body, and momentum. You stop listening to inner signals and start listening only to mental noise. You stop asking what you feel and start asking what if, again and again. Over time, this creates a quiet loss of trust in yourself. You begin to doubt your ability to handle things in real time. You start believing that without perfect preparation, you will fail. This belief is subtle, but powerful. And it keeps you stuck not because you are incapable, but because you have learned to confuse thinking with safety. Before we go further, pause for a moment and ask yourself gently, where in my life am I thinking instead of moving? Where am I waiting for certainty that will never come? Where does control feel safer than action? There is no judgment here, only awareness, because awareness is the first step out of the trap. In the next chapter, we will explore something deeper. Not how to stop overthinking, but why thinking becomes a way to avoid emotional risk. Behind overthinking, there is always a quiet, invisible fear. And once you see that fear clearly, the grip of overthinking begins to loosen. Chapter 2. When thinking becomes avoidance. At some point, thinking stops being a tool and starts becoming a hiding place. Not an obvious one, not something you consciously choose. It happens quietly, almost invisibly. You tell yourself that you are still processing, still preparing, still figuring things out. But beneath the surface, something else is happening. Thinking is no longer serving clarity. It is serving avoidance. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of overthinking. Most people believe avoidance looks like distraction, laziness, or procrastination. They imagine avoidance as scrolling on a phone, watching shows, or doing nothing at all. But avoidance can look very productive. It can look like research, planning, journaling, making lists, revisiting decisions, replaying conversations, imagining future outcomes. From the outside, it looks like effort. From the inside, it feels like responsibility. But emotionally, it functions the same way as running away. When thinking becomes avoidance, it is no longer about understanding the situation. It is about avoiding the feeling that action would bring. Every meaningful action carries an emotional risk. Discomfort, uncertainty, vulnerability, exposure, the possibility of being wrong, the possibility of failing, the possibility of being seen. The nervous system senses this risk long before the mind names it. And when the nervous system feels overwhelmed, it looks for relief. Thinking provides that relief. As long as you are thinking, you are not acting. As long as you are thinking, you are not exposed. As long as you are thinking, you are still safe. This is why thinking becomes so attractive when something matters to you. The more important the action, the stronger the urge to stay in your head. This is not weakness. It is protection. Your brain is trying to regulate emotional intensity. It senses that action would create a spike in feeling, and it offers thinking as a buffer. Thinking slows things down. It creates distance. It keeps emotions manageable. But over time, this protective mechanism turns into a trap, because the relief is temporary, and the cost is long-term stagnation. One of the clearest signs that thinking has become avoidance is repetition. You are not discovering anything new. You are not gaining new insight. You are not getting closer to a decision. You are circling the same thoughts, the same questions, the same doubts. You already know what you want to do. You already know the next step. But instead of moving, you think about why it feels hard. You think about whether now is the right time. You think about how it might go wrong. You think about how you will feel afterward. You think about what others might think. And the loop continues. Another sign is emotional numbness. When thinking becomes avoidance, you start to feel strangely disconnected. You are busy in your mind, but flat in your body. The urgency fades. The desire fades. The energy fades. This is not because you no longer care. It is because your nervous system has gone into a low activation state to avoid overwhelm. Thinking keeps you occupied while your emotional system shuts down. This is why many people say, "I don't feel motivated anymore." Motivation did not disappear. It was suppressed to reduce emotional load. Overthinking is often accompanied by emotional dampening. You feel less fear, but also less excitement. Less anxiety, but also less aliveness. The system chooses stability over growth. It is important to understand this because many people try to solve overthinking with more thinking. They analyze why they overthink. They read about it. They journal about it. They try to intellectually understand their patterns. While insight can be helpful, it can also become another layer of avoidance. You can understand yourself deeply and still stay stuck if understanding replaces movement. Thinking becomes avoidance when it replaces action instead of supporting it. There is also a moral layer to this trap. Many people feel that acting without full certainty is irresponsible. They believe that thinking longer is the right thing to do, that being cautious is virtuous, that hesitation means care. This belief is especially strong in people who were rewarded for being thoughtful, careful, or compliant earlier in life. They learned that slowing down, considering others, and avoiding mistakes was praised. Acting boldly or impulsively was discouraged. Overthinking, in this context, became a learned survival strategy. But survival strategies are not the same as growth strategies. Another reason thinking becomes avoidance is because action forces you into the present moment. Thinking lives in the future or the past. It keeps you away from the now. Acting brings you into direct contact with reality, with sensations, with feedback, with unpredictability. For a nervous system that prefers control, this can feel threatening. So thinking becomes a way to delay that confrontation. You might notice this pattern especially before transitions, before starting something new, before ending something old, before speaking up, before choosing, before committing, before letting go. The closer you get to the edge of action, the louder the thinking becomes. This is not because you need more information. It is because the emotional threshold is approaching. Overthinking is often misunderstood as a cognitive problem, but it is primarily an emotional regulation strategy. The mind steps in to manage feelings that feel too intense, too uncertain, or too risky. Once you see this, the problem shifts. You stop asking, "How do I stop thinking?" and start asking, "What feeling am I avoiding right now?" That question changes everything. Because when you identify the avoided feeling, the pattern becomes clearer. Maybe it is fear of disappointment, fear of failure, fear of regret, fear of rejection, fear of success, fear of responsibility, fear of losing an identity, fear of being seen, fear of being alone with your choice. The specific fear differs, but the mechanism is the same. Thinking keeps you from feeling it fully. This is why telling yourself to just stop overthinking rarely works. You are asking the mind to give up a protective function without offering an alternative way to regulate emotion. The nervous system resists that. It clings to thinking because thinking is what has kept you stable. To move out of the overthinking trap, you must first respect what it has been doing for you. It has been protecting you from emotional overload. It has been buying you time. It has been keeping things manageable. But what once protected you is now limiting you. And protection that lasts too long becomes confinement. The shift begins not by forcing action, but by noticing avoidance without judgment. By gently recognizing when thinking is no longer about clarity, but about safety. By asking yourself, am I thinking because I don't know what to do or because I don't want to feel what doing would bring? This awareness alone starts to loosen the grip. When you see the function of overthinking, it loses some of its power. It is no longer an invisible force controlling you. It becomes a pattern you can observe. In the next chapter, we will go deeper into what sits underneath this avoidance, the specific fear that fuels it. Because overthinking is never random. It is always organized around something you are trying not to feel. And once that fear is named, the need to hide in thinking begins to fade. Chapter 3. The fear behind overthinking. Overthinking is never random. It is never meaningless. It always has a center. And at that center, there is fear. Not loud fear, not panic, but a quiet, persistent fear that shapes your thoughts without announcing itself. Overthinking is the mind's way of circling around something it does not want to touch directly. Most people believe they overthink because they care too much, or because they want to make the right decision. But caring is not the real reason. Wanting to do the right thing is not the real reason. The real reason is that action brings you closer to something emotionally uncomfortable, and thinking keeps you at a distance. Fear does not always feel like fear. Sometimes it feels like hesitation. Sometimes it feels like confusion. Sometimes it feels like endless analysis. But underneath all of it, there is a specific emotional threat your nervous system is trying to avoid. For some people, that fear is failure. The fear of trying and discovering that you are not as capable as you hoped. The fear of confirming a doubt you already carry about yourself. Thinking keeps that fear theoretical. As long as you stay in your head, failure has not happened yet. It is still only a possibility, not a reality. For others, the fear is regret. The fear of choosing one path and forever wondering about the other. The fear of making an irreversible decision. Overthinking creates the illusion that if you think long enough, you can avoid regret altogether. But regret is not avoided by thinking. It is avoided by learning how to live with imperfect choices. There is also the fear of responsibility. Action means ownership. Once you act, the outcome becomes yours. You cannot blame circumstances, timing, or lack of clarity anymore. Overthinking delays that responsibility. It allows you to stay in a space where nothing is fully yours yet. Another common fear behind overthinking is the fear of being seen. Acting exposes you. It puts you in a position where others can judge, evaluate, approve, or disapprove. Thinking keeps you invisible. You can rehearse, prepare, and imagine without ever stepping into the space where someone else might have an opinion. Interestingly, overthinking can also be driven by fear of success. Success changes things. It creates expectations. It demands consistency. It removes familiar excuses. For some people, staying stuck feels safer than moving forward into a version of life that requires more from them. Overthinking delays that transformation. What all these fears have in common is that they are emotional, not logical. You cannot think your way out of them. In fact, the more you try to resolve them mentally, the stronger they become. Because fear is not asking for an explanation. It is asking for reassurance and safety. The mind responds to fear by trying to control outcomes. It creates scenarios. It imagines worst-case situations. It searches for certainty. But certainty is not available. Life does not offer guarantees. So the mind keeps working, hoping that more analysis will finally quiet the fear. It rarely does. This is why overthinking feels exhausting. You are using cognitive effort to manage an emotional experience. It is like trying to hold water with your hands. No matter how tightly you grip, it keeps slipping through. Another important aspect of fear behind overthinking is that it is often learned early. Many people grew up in environments where mistakes were punished, emotions were dismissed, or expectations were high. In those environments, thinking ahead became a survival skill. Anticipating reactions, avoiding errors, reading the room. Overthinking kept you safe then. It helped you adapt. But what once protected you is now restricting you. Your nervous system does not update itself automatically. It continues to use old strategies until you show it a new way. Overthinking persists not because you are broken, but because your system believes it is doing its job. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is to stop asking, "How do I stop overthinking?" and start asking, "What am I afraid would happen if I stopped?" That question often reveals more than hours of analysis. You might discover that if you stopped thinking, you would feel exposed, or anxious, or excited, or uncertain, or alive. All of these sensations can feel overwhelming if you are not used to them. Thinking keeps them muted. It keeps your emotional volume low. But growth requires emotional contact. Not emotional overwhelm, but contact. Feeling without being flooded. This is why the solution to overthinking is not to eliminate fear, but to learn how to stay present with it without escaping into thought. Fear loses its grip when it is felt consciously instead of managed indirectly. When you name it, when you notice it in the body, when you allow it to exist without immediately trying to fix it. This does not mean forcing yourself into action. It means allowing the emotion to move through you rather than around you. Many people believe that once fear disappears, action will become easy. But fear rarely disappears completely. What changes is your relationship with it. You learn that fear can be present and you can still move. That fear does not mean danger. That discomfort does not mean something is wrong. Overthinking teaches you to wait for a feeling that may never come. Complete confidence. But confidence is not a prerequisite for action. It is often a byproduct of action. The more you rely on thinking to create confidence, the more distant confidence becomes. Another subtle fear behind overthinking is the fear of trusting yourself. Acting requires self-trust. It requires believing that even if things go wrong, you will be able to handle it. Overthinking compensates for a lack of that trust. It tries to predict everything so you do not have to rely on yourself in the moment. Rebuilding self-trust does not happen in the mind. It happens through experience, through small actions, through seeing yourself respond, adapt, and recover. Overthinking delays those experiences, which keeps self-trust low, which creates more overthinking. This is how the loop sustains itself. To loosen this loop, you must gently turn toward the fear instead of circling around it. This does not mean confronting it aggressively. It means acknowledging it honestly. Saying to yourself, I am afraid of this outcome. I am afraid of this feeling. I am afraid of what this choice might mean. And then staying present with that fear without immediately escaping into analysis. This is uncomfortable at first, but discomfort is not danger. And the nervous system can learn the difference. When fear is no longer avoided, thinking no longer needs to work so hard. The mind quiets not because you forced it to, but because it is no longer needed as a shield. In the next chapter, we will look at one of the biggest lies overthinking tells you, that clarity must come before action. We will explore why waiting for clarity keeps you trapped, and how clarity actually emerges through movement, not contemplation. Chapter 4. Why clarity never comes. Many people believe that clarity is something you wait for. They imagine it as a feeling that suddenly arrives and makes everything obvious. A moment when doubts disappear, fear quiets down, and the right decision becomes clear. They tell themselves, once I feel clarity, I will move. Once I am sure, I will start. Once it feels right, I will act. This belief sounds reasonable. It sounds responsible. It sounds safe. But it is one of the most powerful traps overthinking creates. Clarity is rarely a starting point. It is almost always a result. When you wait for clarity before taking action, you are waiting for a state that cannot appear without movement. You are asking your mind to give you certainty about something you have not yet experienced. And the mind cannot do that. It can imagine. It can predict. It can simulate. But it cannot provide real clarity about a path you have not walked. This is why clarity feels so elusive. The more you wait for it, the further it seems. The mind promises clarity as a reward for thinking longer. It says, if you analyze this enough, you will finally know. But what actually happens is the opposite. The more you think, the more variables appear. The more possibilities you see. The more questions arise. Thinking expands the field of uncertainty instead of narrowing it. Clarity does not come from considering every option. It comes from committing to one direction and learning from what unfolds. Another reason clarity never comes is because the mind confuses emotional readiness with logical certainty. Many people are not actually waiting for information. They are waiting to feel calm, confident, reassured, free from anxiety. They want clarity to remove emotional discomfort, but clarity is not an emotional anesthetic. It does not erase fear. It does not eliminate uncertainty. It simply gives you enough orientation to move forward while those feelings still exist. When you expect clarity to feel peaceful, you will keep waiting. Real clarity often comes with nervousness, vulnerability, and doubt. It is not a clean, calm experience. It is a quiet knowing that coexists with fear. Overthinking keeps you stuck by constantly shifting the definition of clarity. At first, clarity means understanding the situation. Then it means understanding yourself. Then it means understanding the consequences. Then it means understanding how you will feel later. Then it means understanding how others will react. The goalpost keeps moving, and as long as clarity is defined as complete certainty, it will remain unreachable. This is especially true for life decisions that involve growth. New paths do not come with guarantees. They come with learning curves. Waiting for clarity before starting is like waiting to feel experienced before beginning. Experience only comes after you begin. Another hidden reason clarity never comes is because the mind is trying to protect your current identity. Action changes who you are. It moves you out of familiar roles and patterns. Overthinking delays that change by insisting that you are not ready yet. Clarity becomes a socially acceptable excuse to stay the same. You might notice that you feel clear about decisions that do not threaten your identity. Small choices, low-risk actions, things you have done before. But when a decision challenges how you see yourself, clarity disappears. Not because you lack information, but because the change itself feels destabilizing. Clarity is also blocked by the belief that there is one perfect choice. Overthinking often assumes that if you choose correctly, things will flow easily. And if you choose incorrectly, everything will fall apart. This belief makes clarity feel incredibly important because the stakes feel absolute. But life does not work in such rigid terms. Most choices are adjustable. Most paths can be corrected. Most mistakes are survivable. When you believe there is only one right answer, you put enormous pressure on the decision. That pressure clouds perception. It makes the mind more anxious and less intuitive. Clarity fades under pressure. In reality, clarity often means choosing a direction, not a destination. It means deciding what to explore, not what to guarantee. When you frame decisions this way, clarity becomes more accessible. You are no longer asking the impossible question, will this work perfectly? You are asking a more honest one. Is this worth trying? Another reason clarity stays out of reach is because thinking disconnects you from feedback. Feedback is one of the main sources of clarity. When you act, reality responds. You learn what feels right, what feels wrong, what needs adjustment, what energizes you, what drains you. Without action, you have no feedback, only speculation. Speculation feels convincing, but it is not informative. It does not update your nervous system. It does not build confidence. It does not create orientation. Only experience does that. This is why people often say, after taking a step, I suddenly knew what to do next. The clarity did not appear before the step. It appeared because of the step. Overthinking tells you that clarity should precede movement. Reality shows that movement creates clarity. Another subtle trap is that clarity is often confused with permission. Many people are not actually waiting to know what to do. They already know. They are waiting to feel allowed to choose themselves, allowed to disappoint others, allowed to change direction, allowed to want something different. Clarity becomes a substitute for permission. But no amount of thinking can give you permission to live your life. That permission must be claimed. Waiting for clarity can also become a way to avoid responsibility. As long as you are unclear, you can tell yourself that you are not choosing yet. You are still thinking, still preparing, still being careful. Once you choose, you cannot hide behind uncertainty anymore. The decision becomes yours. Overthinking delays that moment. Understanding this does not mean forcing yourself into action. It means adjusting your expectations. Clarity is not a feeling you wait for. It is a signal you build through engagement with life. It starts vague and sharpens with movement. Instead of asking, "Am I clear enough to start?" a more useful question is, "What is the smallest step that would give me more information?" That question shifts the focus from certainty to curiosity, from control to exploration. Clarity grows when the nervous system learns that uncertainty is survivable, that not knowing is uncomfortable but not dangerous, that you can act without having everything figured out. This learning happens through experience, not thought. When you stop demanding clarity as a prerequisite, something softens. The mind relaxes. The pressure decreases. You are no longer trying to solve your entire future from a single moment. You are allowing it to unfold step by step. In the next chapter, we will explore how to gently move out of the mind and back into action without forcing, pushing, or overwhelming yourself. Not by silencing thought, but by learning how to work with it instead of being trapped by it. Chapter 5. Getting out of your head. Overthinking keeps you living in your mind, but life does not happen there. It happens in the body, in movement, in contact with the present moment. One of the reasons overthinking feels so powerful is because it pulls all your attention upward, away from sensation, away from emotion, away from what is actually happening now. You live in ideas instead of experience. You live in possibility instead of reality. Getting out of your head does not mean stopping thought. It means shifting where your attention lives. Most people try to escape overthinking by thinking their way out of it. They try to reason with themselves, argue with their thoughts, replace one idea with another. This rarely works for long, because the problem is not the content of your thoughts. It is the dominance of thinking itself. As long as the mind is in control, it will keep generating material to analyze. The way out is not to silence the mind, but to rebalance the system. Your body is always in the present moment. It does not worry about the future or replay the past. It responds to what is happening now. When attention returns to the body, the nervous system begins to regulate itself. Thinking softens, not because you forced it to stop, but because it no longer needs to run the show. This is why overthinking often fades when you move, when you walk, when you clean, when you stretch, when you breathe deeply, when you do something physical. Movement brings you back into contact with reality. It gives your system something concrete to respond to. But getting out of your head is not only about physical movement. It is about learning how to tolerate presence. Presence can feel uncomfortable at first. When you stop thinking, you begin to feel what thinking was protecting you from: sensations, emotions, tension, restlessness, vulnerability. This is why many people unconsciously return to thought. Thinking numbs, presence reveals. The key is not to force yourself into presence, but to enter it gently. Start by noticing simple sensations: the feeling of your feet on the floor, the weight of your body in the chair, the rhythm of your breath, the temperature of the air on your skin. These are not techniques. They are anchors. They give your nervous system a reference point outside of thought. When you notice sensation, do not analyze it. Do not label it. Simply notice. This trains your system to stay with experience without immediately turning it into a problem to solve. Another powerful way out of overthinking is narrowing your focus. Overthinking spreads attention wide. It considers everything at once. Getting out of your head means choosing one small point of attention and staying with it. One task, one step, one action. Not because it is the most important thing, but because it is real. This is why small actions are so effective. Overthinking feeds on magnitude. Big decisions, big outcomes, big consequences. Small actions feel manageable. They do not overwhelm the nervous system. They invite participation instead of resistance. You do not need to solve your life to take one step. You do not need clarity about the future to answer one email, make one call, take one walk, write one sentence. These small actions bring you back into contact with movement. and movement weakens the grip of overthinking. It is important to understand that action does not require confidence. Confidence often comes after action, not before. Waiting to feel confident keeps you stuck in your head. Acting while uncertain teaches your system that uncertainty is survivable. Another way to exit overthinking is to shift from evaluation to curiosity. Overthinking evaluates. It judges. It asks whether something is right or wrong, good or bad, successful or failed. Curiosity asks a different question. What happens if I try? Curiosity removes pressure. It turns action into exploration rather than performance. When you approach life with curiosity, you give yourself permission to learn instead of needing to get it right. This reduces the emotional weight that fuels overthinking. You are no longer trying to prove anything. You are simply gathering experience. Getting out of your head also requires adjusting your relationship with discomfort. Overthinking promises relief. It says, if you think enough, you will feel better. But thinking rarely resolves discomfort. It delays it. Learning to stay with mild discomfort without escaping into thought is a crucial skill. This does not mean overwhelming yourself. It means allowing small amounts of discomfort to exist without immediately trying to fix them. Feeling a little unsure, a little tense, a little exposed. These sensations are not signals of danger. They are signals of growth. When you allow discomfort to pass through your body, your nervous system learns that it does not need to be managed by overthinking. Over time, the urge to escape into thought weakens. Another important shift is letting go of the need to understand everything before moving. Understanding feels safe. It feels satisfying. But understanding is not always necessary for action. Many things become clear only in hindsight. Demanding understanding in advance keeps you stuck. Instead of asking, do I fully understand this? Try asking, what is the simplest way to engage with this right now? Engagement creates understanding, not the other way around. It is also helpful to notice when overthinking is triggered. It often appears at specific moments: before starting, before deciding, before speaking, before changing. These are thresholds. Your system is responding to transition. When you recognize this, you can respond differently. Instead of thinking more, you can slow down, breathe, ground yourself, and choose one small step across the threshold. Getting out of your head is not a one-time event. It is a practice. You will move in and out of thought many times. The goal is not to stay present forever. The goal is to notice when thinking has taken over and gently return to experience. There will be days when overthinking is strong. That does not mean you are failing. It means your system is under stress. On those days, the practice is not to push harder, but to simplify. Fewer decisions, smaller actions, more grounding, less self-judgment. The most important thing to remember is that you do not need to eliminate overthinking to live your life. You only need to stop obeying it automatically. Thoughts can exist without dictating your behavior. Doubt can exist without stopping movement. Fear can exist without controlling your choices. When you step out of your head and into experience, something shifts. You feel more connected, more alive, more capable. Not because life becomes easier, but because you are meeting it directly instead of through the filter of thought. This is where momentum begins. Not from motivation or willpower, but from presence, from contact, from allowing yourself to be where you are and move from there. In the final chapter, we will explore how these small shifts accumulate into a deeper transformation. How you become someone who acts without overthinking, not by forcing yourself, but by changing your relationship with thought, fear, and action itself. Chapter 6. Becoming someone who acts without overthinking. Becoming someone who acts without overthinking does not mean becoming fearless, impulsive, or constantly confident. It means becoming someone who no longer waits for perfect internal conditions before moving. Someone who understands that thought, fear, and doubt can exist without controlling behavior. This shift is not about changing who you are. It is about changing what you listen to. Most people believe that action follows certainty, that once they feel ready, they will move. But readiness is not a feeling you wait for. It is a capacity you build, and it is built through repeated contact with uncertainty, not through avoidance of it. People who act without overthinking are not free of doubt. They simply do not treat doubt as a stop signal. They have learned, often unconsciously, that uncertainty is part of movement, not a reason to delay it. This learning does not happen through insight alone. It happens through experience. Each time you act while unsure, something important happens in your nervous system. You prove to yourself that discomfort is tolerable, that mistakes are survivable, that you can respond to what unfolds. Over time, this evidence accumulates. Self-trust grows not from thinking about trust, but from witnessing yourself handle reality. This is why action is transformative in a way thinking never is. Thinking prepares. Action rewires. Becoming someone who acts without overthinking means shifting your identity from someone who must be certain to someone who can adapt. This is a profound change. It moves the source of safety from prediction to resilience. When safety comes from prediction, you must think constantly. When safety comes from resilience, you can move with less mental effort. One of the most important shifts is learning to separate feeling from behavior. Overthinking often convinces you that you must feel calm, confident, and clear before acting. But feelings are transient. They rise and fall. If you wait for the right feeling, you give your emotional state authority over your life. Acting without overthinking means allowing feelings to be present without negotiating with them. You do not need to eliminate anxiety to send the email. You do not need confidence to take the step. You do not need motivation to begin. You need willingness to move with what is here. This does not mean ignoring emotions. It means not requiring them to disappear. Another key shift is redefining success. Overthinking often defines success as choosing perfectly and avoiding mistakes. This creates enormous pressure and feeds paralysis. Acting without overthinking defines success as engagement, as participation, as learning. When success is defined as learning, failure loses its power. Mistakes become information instead of threats. Action becomes lighter. Curiosity replaces fear. People who act without overthinking are not reckless. They simply do not confuse caution with immobility. They take informed steps, but they do not demand guarantees. They understand that most decisions are not final, and most paths can be adjusted. They also understand that overthinking is not a personal flaw. It is a habit. And habits change through repetition, not force. This is why small actions matter so much. Every small action taken without full certainty weakens the overthinking pattern. Every time you move while unsure, you send a message to your system. We can handle this. Over time, the system learns to stand down. Another important aspect of this transformation is learning to tolerate imperfection. Overthinking often hides perfectionism, a belief that things must be done right, that outcomes must be controlled, that mistakes are unacceptable. Acting without overthinking means allowing yourself to be imperfect in motion. Progress is rarely clean. It is messy, nonlinear, and full of course corrections. When you accept this, the pressure to think everything through in advance softens. Becoming someone who acts without overthinking also means developing a different relationship with time. Overthinking often treats decisions as permanent and urgent at the same time. This combination creates panic. Acting without overthinking recognizes that most decisions unfold over time. You do not need to solve everything now. You only need to take the next step. This perspective reduces the weight of choice. When you stop trying to decide your entire future at once, action becomes more accessible. Another quiet but powerful change is learning to trust your body. Overthinking disconnects you from physical signals. Acting without overthinking involves listening to sensation, intuition, and subtle cues. Not as absolute truth, but as guidance. The body often knows when it is time to move long before the mind agrees. This does not mean abandoning reason. It means integrating it. Reason informs action, but it does not dominate it. People who act without overthinking also tend to have a gentler relationship with themselves. They do not punish hesitation. They notice it. They do not shame fear. They acknowledge it. This gentleness reduces internal conflict, which reduces the need for overthinking as a coping mechanism. Self-compassion is not softness. It is efficiency. A system that feels safe does not need to overanalyze. Over time, these shifts create a new internal pattern. You stop asking, "Am I ready?" and start asking, "Am I willing?" You stop waiting for clarity and start allowing it to emerge through engagement. You stop trying to control outcomes and start trusting your ability to respond. This does not mean life becomes effortless. It means you become more fluid, less rigid, more responsive. You will still think. You will still hesitate. Overthinking may still appear at times, especially during stress or transition, but it will no longer run your life. It will be a signal, not a command. The goal is not to eliminate overthinking. The goal is to stop living inside it. As you move forward, remember this. Action is not the opposite of fear. It is the context in which fear loses its power. Confidence is not the absence of doubt. It is the willingness to act with doubt present. You do not need to become a different person to act without overthinking. You only need to stop postponing your life until your mind feels comfortable. Your life does not begin after certainty. It begins in motion. And every small step you take from this place builds the version of you who no longer waits to start.